Eskom has announced that it will continue implementing Stage 4 blackouts until Thursday morning and then will reduce to Stage 3 until Saturday. Eskom says this is due to the shortage of generation capacity as a result of the persistent high levels of breakdowns and to further replenish the emergency generation reserves. The news this afternoon coming, of course, as the newly appointed board is getting ready to get their hands dirty. The new board chairperson is no stranger to the power utility. Mpho Makwana served on the board before as Eskom and he was also on the board of directors from 2002 to 2011, and he was also Eskom CEO and the chair. He's back now chairing the board at a time when Eskom is facing serious challenges. What will he do differently this time? He joins us now virtually from Cape Town, more on the country's electricity emergency. Mr. Makwana, good afternoon. Welcome to Today on eNCA. Thank you very much for your time. My first question, as I was thinking about our discussion, I know you've been interviewed by other media houses since your announcement of your appointment, and I've been reading some of those interviews, and I was just still wondering, I want to hear it from you and here on eNCA. Why did you accept to be chairman of Eskom? Why second time round?
Good afternoon, Praten. Good afternoon to the viewers of eNCA. Thank you very much for having us this afternoon. I really think that the answer for me, after I guess various conversations with our shareholder, it just felt like it was the right thing to do in terms of contributing back to the country and rather be part of the solution than be out on the fences, because like you, like all South Africans, I'm also affected by load shedding. I'm also affected by an Eskom that doesn't seem to be performing the way it should or the way we've known it to perform. And so perhaps given that I'm one of those people that perhaps my circumstances allow me to avail myself, I'm one of those few that also among those that are available that recalls what a successful Eskom used to look like. And hopefully that sense of institutional memory is something I can give back to Eskom and to the country.
Is there some unfinished business from your previous tenure?
Not at all. I had a good 9 years when I was there, and I don't have any unfinished business to return to. They do say, as you say, that into the same river you cannot step twice, but I'm stepping into this river knowing that it's different, it feels different. And hopefully with the help of a collective of men and women who are also stepping into this river for the first time, we will be able to look at things afresh and hopefully see the blind spots that others who are immersed in it cannot see. And so we hope we bring a different perspective again this time around.
How different is today's Eskom from the one you left?
So very different. The Eskom I joined in 2002, April, was a highly regarded utility globally. In 2001, Eskom had been celebrated as the Global Utility Company of the Year in 2001. Immediately around that time, there were two major business schools that published business case studies. Harvard Business School was one of them. Stanford University was one of them. A few years as we were building up to hosting the World Cup in 2009, a highly regarded business magazine called Strategy in Business out of Boston and New York published a really wonderful case study of Eskom being the backbone of hosting one of the most important World Cups that were hosted on the African continent. Secondly, the Eskom that of then had great corporate culture. It was the home of A-team players. The top players in the various fields of engineering related to electricity generation would always be found at Eskom. And as a result, because of that A-League, it attracted other A-League players in other parts of the organization. And so our biggest challenge is to restore that sense of pride for the organization. The third area is that Eskom was a high-performance organization. Even though it's an organization that operates in planning horizons of 20 years, it had a sense of delivery, a sense of agility. You may recall, Raden, when you and I were still in the marketing and media industries, this idea of living standard measure, the LSMs that media owners like where you used to be before when we first met, and agencies like Ogilvy, where I used to be when I first met you in the mid-90s, used the LSM model to determine how to pitch brands in line with consumer spend. That LSM model was started at Eskom when Eskom was rolling out electrification in the first 5 to 10 years of our democracy. And again, we were celebrated as a country with the highest level of access. By 2004, we had access levels in terms of average population access at the highest. In the nuclear space, for a good number of years, even until when I stepped down in June 2011, Eskom was always rated among the top 3 nuclear operators by the Nuclear Council and the International Energy Association. And so there are many of these accolades that we can remember. Yes. Eskom was ranked 10th in the world by energy availability and capacity. And so there's lots to be done to fix Eskom. There's also lots to be done to really inspire the men and women that work at Eskom. And I think the important thing as South Africa to really, I would appeal to, if we want Eskom to be fixed, we must remember that it's not just the technical maintenance, it's not just the number crunching that is going to fix Eskom, it's people. And we must try and find a way of battering them less and lifting their spirits more, because they need us as much as we need them to turn the place up.
Yeah, I would like to unpack that a little bit further shortly, but you've just painted this picture of this giant that was successful, that was a standard bearer of sorts in the energy sector, not just in the provision of electricity, but also in how it was managing its affairs. And with the nuclear plant, the Quebec one, also being a shining example. That seems like ages ago to where we are today. What do you think went wrong? Because when you listen to state capture evidence that was given at the Zondo Commission, things started going sort of haywire from 2007 onwards. You were still at Eskom. Do you have a sense at the time? Did you have a sense at the time that things were beginning to go wrong?
2007 would have been early days for what we then subsequently saw with state capture. When one was there, the early signs of state capture only started showing themselves after the FIFA World Cup, after 2010. But it felt like it was still a mile away. I remember in 2009, we did a comprehensive ethics sweep as the board, where we asked the SIU to come and do an ethics audit of Eskom. We wanted to see how many Eskom employees at the time, out of the 32,000 or so, how many Eskom employees did business with Eskom. We wanted to look at the state of compliance. And it was at that stage in 2009, late 2000, that we got worried that it appeared that internal controls were being compromised somewhere. But we never thought we would see the depth and gravity of what has then subsequently played out with state capture.
Did you act to improve? Did you then act when you saw in 2010, 2009, post the FIFA World Cup, that there could be some issues with internal controls? Were measures taken whilst you were there to improve those internal controls?
Measures were always taken. In fact, the then board took measures before we even saw any worrying signals. In 2003, towards the end, as a matter of best practice, because Eskom was always driven by best practice, we instituted a process as the board where at that time, any contract that was 500 million and above, given the delegation of authority to EXCO. So anything that was above the EXCO delegated authority that came to the board, we had a process that the board committee that had to oversee it, at the time there was a tender and procurement committee of the board, it would subject every such contract under forensic audit. So any contract that ever came to the board since the late 2003, early 2004, always went through that robust process. So we've always been a board then that sought to mitigate things before they happened. Okay. I'm told by people who were insiders that some of the reasons why our board was wiped out clean in 2011 by the powers that be at the then public enterprise was because they felt we were too strong and too ethical for clearly what has since played out.
Should you not have spoken out at the time yourself to say we are being moved out because we are regarded to be too ethical, to be too clean? Perhaps that could have been the red flag that the country needed at the time. Do you have regrets about that?
You couldn't have spoken out. Certainly where we had reason to speak out, we always spoke out. But you couldn't have spoken out in those terms because what appeared to be credible reasons of governance were used, in that our term had reached the 9-year maximum. And at that time, you must remember, King 3 had just come out, indicating that directors should not allow themselves to serve on boards for longer than 9 years. So it appeared to be legitimate governance reasons that were used. And I think that any director knows that you serve anywhere, whether it's private sector, public sector, you serve where you serve at the pleasure of the shareholder. The shareholders of any entity determine at the AGM by vote who stays and who doesn't stay as a director. And so at that time, for odd reasons, the shareholder used their prerogative to using credible codes to exit directors. You know, one of the things all of us have learned with state capture. State capture had a strange way of turning good people into bad people. If you look at all these firms, all these businesses that were impacted, some of them were really solid service providers, but they got infested by players that then turned them into bad apples when actually they were not.
Okay. I think I've covered enough on the past. I just wanted to get your sense of where you were at and what was happening. I'm going to come to the present now as we look ahead, because, of course, you and the rest of the new members are new and you are taking things forward, hopefully. But just personally first, you sit on many other boards. Eskom is not the only board that you chair. You chair a number of other boards. If your LinkedIn profile is updated, which I believe it is, because I know you are a consummate professional and you understand communication very well as well from your past. If you have so many other hats you're wearing, how can we as South Africans be confident you will dedicate the required time and energy and effort on this new important role that you feel you've been called again by your country to play as Eskom board chair?
Thank you for that question. So let me start off and say where I am now transitioning into Eskom in the financial services sector. It is an important systemic sector to the economy. The regulator in the sector that we report to has got a guiding principle which all the major financial institutions abide by, called the 4+1 rule. And the 4+1 rule says that based on assessments that were done on large organizations that listed, especially in the public space, you need to be at least on one of those financial sector institutions plus 4 others to be able to pay attention to your duties as a career non-executive director. Remember, I'm not employed in a full-time role anywhere. I'm a portfolio professional. I have a portfolio of interest in investments. I have a portfolio of interest in non-executive director boards. And then thirdly, I have a portfolio of interest where I do advisory work. So in terms of major boards, currently actually I'm below the threshold of 4+1. I'm on 3+1. Because what maybe doesn't come across clearly or didn't come across clearly, and I saw this also last week Friday when we were announcing, I retired from the board of ArcelorMittal in May 2022. Professor Bonang Mohale took over from me at the AGM in May 2022, so that's one major board I'm no longer chairing. The major boards that I'm chair of, that are public and of major consequence, is really Nedbank and now Eskom. There are smaller mid-sized companies, two of them that I'm involved with. One, I'm involved as lead independent director, that's Invicta Group. It's a small emerging mid-sized company. And then the other is a state-owned entity, which balance sheet is less than 5 billion rands, and it's SAFCO, South African Forestry Company. The rest of the things that I'm involved with are either of an entrepreneurial nature, where the small family business that I own holds interests in, or advisory boards where you get invited to do advisory work, be it because it hosts a major event or because there's certain interest groups that get served. There's also been an incorrect reporting on my directorship in an IPP. So firstly, I haven't held any commercial interest in an IPP since 2019. In 2019, I sold all the assets that I was involved with because after 10 years of investment, it felt like the right time to move on. And so I sold all those interests. Until Friday, I was an independent non-executive director on one of the country's IPP companies. And as soon as I received that call saying the shareholder had concluded the process that they were going to announce, I then stepped down immediately.
So currently there's no conflict of interest that you have as board chair, as the board chair.
Absolutely not. It's one thing that I'm religious about, because even then, remember when you are called to say, would you be available at the conversation start, you submit a comprehensive CV. There's also a standard form that all directors have called Director Declaration of Interest. I submitted that as well. So, by the way, I'm a director on this and this and this and this. And immediately it became clear prior to the announcement that matters were moving forward, it was serious. You then start ensuring that you rationalize that set of interests to ensure that come day one, you are not conflicted. So there's nothing that will ever make me to recuse myself from chairing a meeting at Eskom. There's nothing that would make me recuse myself from chairing a meeting at Nedbank. And there's also nothing that would make me have to recuse myself from chairing a meeting at SAFCO.
Okay, thanks for thanks for clarification, because there's been words that some of the directors, the new directors, might have conflict of interest, and of course you having been involved in an IPP and now you say that you've stepped down from everything, there'll be no conflict. Now let's look at how you're going to, what are your thoughts currently as you start? I mean, it's early days. How are you going to fix Eskom? Are you going to have a refocus strategy? What are your thoughts at this early stage?
So on Monday, we firstly had our first induction with the shareholder, where we were taken through the various government frameworks, including the government's master plan for energy in the country, so that we understood the shareholder priorities with regards to Eskom. So that is a government framework that exists, and anybody, it could be Joe Sox tomorrow, anybody that is chair of Eskom, would have to work within a defined mandate of the shareholder. The second thing is we come finding that there was a board of directors. People may have views on the effectiveness or non-effectiveness of that board, but the reality is under the direction of the shareholder, they had signed off a strategy, they had signed off a shareholder compact, which we now have to review where there's flexibility to review, but remembering that it's been signed off over the next 3 years or so. So we will go through our own processes, boards go through board strategy sessions, to review what exists, to review what is fit for purpose, and to also discard that which is no longer fit for purpose. And so we're going to go through that process with the EXCO to arrive at a slightly modified version of the strategy that we will be able to own as the board. And the reason we would have to own is because among these public frameworks, the president of the country made it clear on a few occasions, including last week in Parliament, that it is his desire that this country should go back to at least 75% energy availability factor. Our duty as a board is to figure out how and at what pace that can be achieved. And so that is part of the strategy review that we will have to embark upon. The key lessons, I'm a strategist by training and by grooming, perhaps, if I can say that. I've been groomed by some of the country's best scenario thinkers and some of the country's best strategic planning, corporate strategy advisors. And one of the things that you constantly get reminded of is the cliche that strategy, culture, eats strategy for lunch. So you might have the best plan in the world, but if the corporate culture is wrong, for many reasons, whether because of the aftermath of state capture, where there's still remnants of corruption, or because simply you don't have the right values in the organization, you will find that you will go and pen the best strategies, but they will not come to fruition because the culture will eat that strategy for lunch. So our fundamental role boils down to appreciating that all business is people business. People make businesses change. And so the 39 to 40,000 Eskom employees are of paramount importance to restoring Eskom's reputation and restoring Eskom's performance to where it used to be. So that's very crucial. And so that then you can then go and look at the technical aspects of maintenance. You can go and look at the supply chain. You raised an important question earlier about then what really went wrong. One of the things that Eskom has to grapple with is the high cost of its value chain. The Eskom of the past that used to have these global accolades had a very low cost structure. And that's why it could also boast, among others, being one of the cheapest electricity in the world, is because that electricity was produced of a relatively low cost structure. So there's also going to need to be an overhaul, a review of where the costs are, be it in terms of parts procurement, be it in terms of coal itself, be it in terms of any other of the raw materials that are important for producing electricity. We're going to have to figure out how to be cost competitive.
What about your thoughts around the workforce? I mean, you've mentioned earlier that employees, in terms of culture, are important. And as you said, culture will eat your strategy for lunch. So are the thoughts currently as you come in, Mr. Makwana, how are you going to motivate Eskom staff? I mean, they must be pretty much motivated, demotivated at the moment, because we're all affected by the blackouts. And, of course, there was state capture that really also dealt a big blow to Eskom. What are your thoughts about how you're going to get that spirit up and going at Eskom so the employees do what they are supposed to do at the various power stations to making sure that power is generated?
My initial thoughts, and these are still to percolate through various board discussions, is that firstly, you need some semblance of a ground-up engagement plan. When we were preparing for the FIFA World Cup, one of the things that we did well was that, and the benefit then, I suppose, I had more authority as both CEO and chair, but not that there is no authority this time around. But we went through a comprehensive roadshow. There's no part of Eskom that I had not been to between 2009 and 10, where we inspired everybody to know that we had to keep the lights on ahead of the FIFA World Cup and during the FIFA World Cup. So we will borrow from some of those experiences and look at how we go on similar roadshows, power station to power station, region to region, to really re-engage people, to re-energize people. And there's various change management capabilities and methodologies you can use. It so happens that 2 out of the new board members have got rich history in turning organizations around. So we'll be able to, as a collective, put our heads together and look at how we emerge with a plan together with the executive team to ensure that that happens. Remember though that boards don't run companies.
Yes.
To do through the executive team, but being there in the background, supporting, cheering on, spurring on, and inspiring.
Okay. Have you met Mr. Andre de Ruyter?
Yes, we've met. In fact, soon after our announcement, we had our meeting, and I thought it was a cordial meeting. And I found him to be someone who had put a lot of dedication. I mean, people will always have views about whatever they think of the individual, but I have found him to be someone who's got his heart in Eskom. And so we will find ways of working together, of moving forward together. Certainly, we will also find ways of ensuring that we step up performance. Where we feel performance needs to be stepped up, we'll certainly complement where we need to complement, and we'll certainly challenge where we need to challenge in terms of executive performance.
As part of your review, could we foresee leadership changes at the executive level?
It is early days to tell. You know, if I were to pronounce on that, it's like walking past the street in Soweto and judging a house by the color of its curtains.
I needed to ask you. I needed to ask you, Mr. Makwana, because there's been growing calls for Mr. Andre de Ruyter to be fired, including by the like just last week or a few days ago of Black Business Council, saying that they believe that one of your first tasks as the new board is to get rid of the executive.
It is some of those things that are easy to say. A reasonable board will come in, which I believe we are. A reasonable board will come in and give people the benefit of the doubt to prove themselves. And then based on facts, based on data, you take a view to say, you said you'd commit this, you've achieved this. You said you've committed to this, but you didn't achieve this. Then you start having the difficult conversation fairly soon based on that. But I don't think we're going into Eskom with any preconceived notions. We're going into Eskom appreciative of the urgency that the South African public has on the need to turn Eskom around. But we want to do it fairly. I mean, we must remember we're a fair country. We've got a constitution that says you respect people's rights. We've got a labor dispensation that says you do things properly. So we will engage fair and properly and give them a fair chance to prove themselves before we can arrive at such conclusions.
Okay, very briefly, in the last few minutes I have with you, Mr. Makwana, how soon are you able then to get going as the new board in terms of looking at that strategy and trying and address some of their priorities? How soon can you do that?
Yesterday. We are already going. As I said, since Sunday we've been working. We've had board meetings already on Monday with the shareholder to unpack our mandate. We now are left to ourselves. The shareholders' words were, you now need to develop your own rhythm. So in a matter of days, we will be meeting as the board to sign off board committees, assign different responsibilities to board members. And in a matter of days, the rubber hits the road. The audit committee will meet. There's numbers, the financial statements to be signed off. There will be, I'm sure, a committee of the board that will overlook the technical challenges in terms of, as you rightly pointed out, we've got a good number of engineers on the board. They will be able to assess the technical prowess of the organization. Collectively as a board, it makes sense that we go to a few power stations and appraise ourselves on the situation there on the ground. This is going to be a board that is going to have to embrace ground-up governance rather than purely helicopter view governance from head office.
Being on the ground, rolling up your sleeves and taking the spanners as well there, making sure we are connected. Well, we'll watch. We'll be observing, as you know, the whole country will be watching and observing because we really need to put an end to the ongoing load-shedding sagas that are harming the economy. And thank you very much for your time. I'm sure you and I will touch base in the near future as well. That's the Eskom, the new Eskom board chairperson, Mpho Makwana. You've had the man. We just touched on his past and some of his He's thinking about the current situation around issues of state capture as well, and in terms of Eskom, and what are the plans going forward. They are already working, he says, and it's going to be a ground-up approach. They won't be sitting just in the boardrooms. That's Mpho Makwana. Well, time will tell.